We're part of the Asia Pacific region, of course, and the Asia Pacific region has perhaps a little bit more diversity in its political systems than you might be used
Absolutely.
to around North America. So this is why we have, guided democracies in Singapore, which make 30-year plans for the future, and they actually can see that in 2050 they're not going to be able to feed the population. So hell, what are we going to do? Oh, let's look at the cellular agriculture stuff. That's really cool. How do we use that? How do we jump on that and be a food producing nation instead of a food importing nation? And there's other places, India, for different reasons, with the biggest democracy in the world. And so the big countries like India and China and some of the smaller APAC region, I think there are real opportunities for us, being the Australian government, to actually do more in maximising our capacity to fill an export role to those countries, whether we're talking about technology, innovation, venture capital, whatever it is. It's almost impossible in Australia to have a conversation that makes sense about food security, by the way, because hello, we're a bloody enormous nation and we don't have that many people living here, and food is not a problem for us. I should give a corollary to that, is that we have huge problems with some of our rural and remote Indigenous communities who cannot get fresh food. So their supplies are very restricted and probably not to the most healthy food lines. So to start that conversation in Australia is about an economic argument for many of us. And Sonalie, we're in the process of having a federal government that is banning the live export of sheep. Hallelujah. And so our farmers, particularly in my half of the country, the western half of the country, they make a lot of money out of live sheep export. And so they're looking for transition arrangements for their future. How do they make money in agriculture into the future in a sustainable a culturally appropriate way into the future? So I'm really trying to push the fact that, hey, you guys, we've got all of these alternative technologies coming to the fore at the moment. So you're talking about looking to China. I totally get that. And I think we should be looking at India and APAC to form better links to actually get this technology out in those regions. We've talked about some of the darkness in the tunnel. Where are the lights, Sonalie, that we should be promoting that illuminate this tunnel of darkness that we're stuck in at the moment?
I think it's incredibly important to make sure that Asia Pacific is at the table. The Asia Pacific region has taken a very different approach around protein transition, and you could argue that it's potentially the more kind of stable, consistent, long-term, successful approach, which is that it is very aligned with food security. Yeah. And I think that it's really important to understand that food security means different things to different people. Yes. And one of the most fascinating things about meeting you in Melbourne and going to Food Frontier was hearing, someone very senior in a major food company explain that it's very difficult to explain to the average Australian consumer or chef that there's a beef problem when you have so much grass land that is ideal for grass-fed beef, and that grass-fed beef is available, it's consistent, it's not particularly expensive. And whereas an Asian consumer who never looks at cows on a field and did not grow up with what I like to call the happy cow myth, is not going to have the same experience around what beef represents to them in their diet. What is really, really apparent is the need to localize solutions. And what that really comes down to is what I mentioned earlier, which is we need more empathy for consumers, for government officials, and for cultural differences. We really need to understand people better. And I think what a lot of the latest elections are showing is that the mainstream media and a lot of us don't seem to understand the average person very well, and don't seem to have a real kind of grasp on the difficulties that they're dealing with. I think that people are inherently trying to figure out what's best for their families. So there's a bit of inherently good, there's a bit of inherently selfish. That's part of who we are. Why is there such a tension between what we need to do to survive and help our families thrive and what's bad for the climate crisis. There's this
Yeah.
massive tension.